Hello, and welcome back to 303 Podcast. Today we are talking to BIPOC and non BIPOC music educators. They all come from different backgrounds, but each story has its similarities. My main topic was about BIPOC students and their access to music and music education. But the question evolved into a more complex dialogue, the focus of which was on social and cultural influences of their identity development, leading into the topic of representation of BIPOC in Western European classical music. We will start off with Dr. Richard Hodges, who is a BIPOC professor at Western Washington University. He started singing from the age of 5 and was able to sing soprano, alto, and tenor. Joining 8th grade choir in North Carolina, he was a star singer. Dr. Hodges also talks about his economic status, coming from a low income family, and being a first gen college student. Along with other interviewees, we then talked about my main topic of barriers in music for BIPOC students. Did you ever feel like there was any sort of um, barriers, or maybe you had something going on at home, or financially you weren't able to afford something that prevented you from continuing on your musical journey? Or was it mostly?
No, so here's the thing. I couldn't afford much of anything. When I went to this summer opera camp, when I went to the summer opera camp, on the first day, they told me to come. My mother called. They told me to come anyway, even though she couldn't afford it.
Mm-hmm.
And after the first day, they offered me a full ride scholarship, so I didn't have to pay for that. And then I found that throughout the rest of the time was also kind of a scholarship deal to where I would sing, people would hear me, and then be like, "Oh, well, we'll fund this." So, as far as the financial barriers to be able to or not be able to sing and to do what I need to do, I didn't experience that in the same way because I kept getting scholarships. I think I would have felt it more if I wouldn't have received multiple scholarships to do what I needed to do. I think I would have felt the crunch of that more.
Mm.
Yeah, after I was playing for a while, my mom and dad paid for me to go take lessons.
Well, to be kind of, I guess, to get on the personal level here, my mom was going through a divorce with my stepdad at the time, and so we did lose that source of income for me to, um, be able to afford certain things. But I had other family members, again, which I'm super grateful for, that supported what I wanted to do. So I was able to, my grandma offered her assistance financially when it came to my music lessons.
Oh.
I never felt like at the time, and even as I reflect back on it as an adult, that I ever had any of those kinds of limits or complicating factors curtail kind of my access to music learning.
No, not for me specifically. I mean, my family was more financially stable, I think, than average. My school did make effort to provide school instruments and stuff.
Yeah, I'd say the biggest thing was not just for myself, but for a lot of my other peers was we all had to work a lot of jobs, especially because I mean Yakima was a very poor, it's a very poor town. I mean it's all minorities, so we almost everybody had a job. So having the time to play and work and practice and still help support your family was a very big struggle. I was lucky enough that I I didn't have to worry about oh I need to help pay a lot of these bills, but I've had my partner, she worked 2 jobs and still was going to school and was still doing music, but it was very stressful because there's a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, privately. My parents paid for drum lessons for me, I think, all 4 years of high school. I think I started private lessons in 8th grade. And I went through different drum teachers, maybe 3. And sometimes I would take lessons after school with my middle school band director, who was also a percussionist. And she didn't charge because she's just a beautiful human being.
Not everyone had a barrier, but those who did had a support group or person that helped them get funding for lessons or instruments. The next part of the conversation is where things got interesting and shifted the focus from access to higher education into the relevance of intersectionalities in white spaces. Each person was asked about the scenario in the book, Why Are All the Black Students Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? By Beverly Daniel Tatum, PhD. Quote, I asked my students to complete the sentence, I am blank, using as many descriptors as they can think of in 60 seconds. All kinds of trait descriptions are used, friendly, shy, assertive, intelligent, honest, and so on. But over the years, I have noticed something else. Students of color usually mention their racial or ethnic group. For instance, I am black, Puerto Rican, Korean American. White students who have grown up in strong ethnic enclaves occasionally mention being Irish or Italian, but in general, white students rarely mention being white. When I use this exercise in co-educational settings, I notice a similar pattern in terms of gender, religion, and sexuality. Women usually mention being female, while men don't usually mention they're male. Jewish students often say they are Jewish, while mainline Protestant rarely mention their religious identifications. A student who is comfortable revealing it publicly may mention being gay, lesbian, or bisexual. Though I know most of my students are heterosexual, it is very unusual for anyone to include their heterosexuality in their list. End quote. Interviewees were then asked what they thought about spaces built around white straight males and how they navigated them.
My mother taught us how to navigate these spaces a little differently. So I've been navigating white spaces for a long time. Yeah, I've been navigating white spaces for a really long time. So I don't know if I ever think of it that way. I never felt the need to be a culture bearer because other races aren't asked to be a culture bearer in a space. I think culture bearing is not inclusive, and it subjugates the person to only being the one thing that they identify as, even though every culture bearer I know is multifaceted in many ways.
Yeah.
But I never would consider myself a culture bearer because honestly, I'm just a person. I'm just me, and I'm not. And how can I bear a full culture?
Yeah. Honestly, the time that felt the most jarring to me was moving to Bellingham. Coming from Hawaii, where it's so racially and ethnically and culturally diverse, to a city where it's like 90% white, and there's a really healthy queer population in Bellingham, which was really helpful to me. But I have never in my life been around so many white people, and it was culturally shocking. I'm lucky enough to have grown up in a place where my race and my identity aren't a minority and aren't seen as other.
Here are some other opinions on white spaces.
I'll just use Western as an example that it kind of it is a white space that's then reaching out and trying to be inclusive, but through the act of doing that, they're acknowledging that they're oh, and we have the multicultural center, which is separate from the rest of the school, which is for everybody else. And I think that's a hard thing to navigate, and I haven't done a whole lot of thinking about that just because I have the luxury of not having to worry about that simply because I'm white, and I don't know. It's tough. For my last GOR, I took a East Asian Studies class about China. It was a very interesting class it was a small group class with a big variety of people of different ethnicities and you know, all the different identifiers. And it's not like it was designed that way. It's just like the topic attracted a lot of different people, and they were all really engaged. And even though the professor was white and I was there, and being white, we had a diverse group who were all, you know, engaged about the topic. And so that, you know, like, it wasn't like they accomplished the goal of being diverse without like setting out like, this is what we're doing, and like making it that, kind of like what I said, is like where they're doing it on purpose.
Do you have any opinion on that? Like, any thoughts, ideas?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. We see it literally everywhere, how, you know, the people that are succeeding in a lot of, especially academia, are the white people, and sometimes even more so the men. And then, yeah, like I was just talking about with like bands specifically, like it's just so male dominated. But we're seeing so much value in having women and people of color perform and be leaders and compose for the band. And I think there's still a lot of growth to accomplish, but like lately, in the last like 20 years, like we are seeing growth, but it's been very slow as people are like slowly getting out of that mindset. I would agree though that like white males are, cis white males, let's say, right, are also more successful and often more supported in this field of music.
Being a BIPOC student myself, I thought I had lost some of my culture entering white spaces. But here's Christian, a BIPOC music educator, talking about how it brought him closer to his culture. Do you feel like you lost a part of your culture entering the white space of Western?
I'd say, I wouldn't say I lost anything. I would say like I missed the food for sure. But I feel like now that I'm over here, I feel like I've gotten a little closer to my culture. I've been like trying to dive deeper into my culture just because it's not around me no more. You know, I have to do my own research on it. And like I miss like the bands playing outside, so I listen to more of that music, and I'm like just trying to, you know, involve myself in a lot more Mexican things, for my example. And yeah, honestly, I think it brought me a little closer to my culture just because I missed it so much.
Michael J. Nakula wrote a book called Understanding Youth. In Chapter 1, the emphasis on how adolescents develop a sense of self through the stories they construct and tell about themselves suggests that cognitive development is deeply intertwined with social context and personal experiences. Here's Dr. Hodges' thoughts on how our experiences shape who we are. I was in my 303 class, which this project is for. Basically the only one who showed my skin color, and it did feel like sometimes I did need to kind of address things pertaining to my race. And did you ever have instances like that?
Oh, always. But the thing is that I don't look at that as culture bear. I look at that as cultural learning, because the other part of it is that you bring what your experience is for you. But if we brought someone that was another person of color from across the country that had a totally different upbringing and a totally different worldview experience, they would have a different thing to say than you, and you are both of the same culture. So it's, we go back to that nature versus nurture situation. Nature-wise, you are the same culture, but nurture-wise, you're not.
Dr. Hodges later goes on to echo Christian's words on the importance of researching your own culture. Before I let the rest of the interview with Dr. Hodges play out, I want to point out that youth in schools now have more opportunities to experience music education as implied by the people I interviewed. I thought that they didn't because classical music always felt like a foreign culture, but Dr. Hodges sheds light on this. As a music educator, it is important to blend your teachings with the culture of your students because they are different, and that is not inherently a bad thing. Classical music is not turning youth away, but our ignorance of other cultures' music, as if classical music is the only thing out there, might be. Being a music educator, making effort to be culturally aware, shapes and impacts the identity of youth that we teach. Switching gears here, when talking about white spaces and thinking about students who are wanting to go to college, it's not necessarily a Western specific issue, but it just in higher education in general. When we think about white spaces and positions of power, usually people in power don't like to give up power. Taking Western as an example, do you feel like there are white spaces in Western because of classical music being a white-centric European just kind of culture? Or do you think that classical music is something that BIPOC students want to study?
Love this. I'm gonna share a little story with you.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to a HBCU. I went to a historically black college, University of North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
But my music theory and musicology professor was this white lady from like a small town in North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
As we learned all the classical literature that we had to, the standards,
Mm-hmm.
she also said it was important for us to know all of the classical music created by people of color.
Mm-hmm.
Because classical music has an identity that it is white centric.
Mm-hmm.
So the problem is that most BIPOC students don't realize that there's an identity in classical literature because no one tells them, no one researches to realize, oh, we have identity in it from the very beginning. So there's a bunch of classical 18th, 17th century literature in Mexico by people of color for you to connect into. The same way that there are black American composers that are classical American composers, the issue is that you don't know this because the canon says you should know Bach, Beethoven, Mozart.
Do you think, taking a step back, that is because we have kind of like this white space in higher education, or is it something that we can keep centralized in music as a culture thing instead of like higher education is just white and so this is...
No, we teach history based on impact.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if I would serve it as white spaces in classical literature. I serve it as there's a lot of information to get through. So these are the highlights, but you can fill in the gaps later. So I think the mindset is people are looking for reflections of themselves and believe that, oh, we're in a white space, so we're learning these right. I don't connect to these quote unquote white people. But in actuality, you've missed the point. The point is that these people did something, no matter their race, they did something prolific. So then if you want a connection, then you find the other people that were composing during that same time that actually look like you, and see what they were doing.
Well, let me push back a little bit on some of the stuff, because not all of it, but just thinking about the idea that like you said that we choose music on the stuff we like during Christmas. What do we want to hear? But it is. I feel like there is some sort of like white space that has created what we wanted to hear, like
You feel like you have a white space that's created what you want to hear?
just like during Christmas time. Like I know that my culture has that song Feliz Navidad.
Mm-hmm.
Now I haven't done research on whether that song is based on a white song.
It's not.
Or
I at least know that. I get you, but my question to you is, who told you that that's all you had for Christmas? Who told you because that's why I say it goes back to research.
Yeah.
Who told you that was the only Christmas song out there? Who told you that the only cultural representation you have during that time period is Feliz Navidad?
Well, it wasn't more of like who told me. It was more like I grew up in the space where this stuff was played constantly, and so I didn't really think about my culture. Yes,
And that's
pointing at
and
me,
that
yes.
and that's my point. And that's my point.
Mm-hmm.
What you were presented was that this is all you have.
Yeah.
So it's like, I think the hard part is you have to research.
Yeah.
And the expectation of, I hate to say it, I'm not going to generalize the generation, but I think the expectation of current students that are going to be educators is that in undergrad, I should receive all these things. I should have all this stuff and everything should relate exactly to me and it should be purchased for me. And and it's right.
Yes.
When in actuality, what you don't realize is that undergrad is the beginning. Undergrad is the beginning of the journey, which is why you foundationally have to know Bach, Beethoven, Mozart.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that that's where you stay. You evolve over time. But it's about research and it's about comfort. When you leave here with a music degree, it says that there's a baseline.
Yeah.
And every school across the country, when you leave with a bachelor's in music degree, everybody has reached or should have reached said baseline.
Yeah. What about the students who kind of get stuck in that baseline where they don't want to, venture out into, I see you shaking your head. If you want to elaborate.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the one thing about students that don't move past that baseline, it's because they take their undergraduate experience as what they should be doing, and that's it. No one's told them that it is a baseline. And people that get stuck are people that are no longer curious. What I love to say is, if you want your bands to do things of other cultures and other composers, or if you want to highlight your own culture, you don't have to do it in spite of these other things. You do it with. And you approach it the same way. You don't approach it like it's oh, we're gonna do this, Latin piece now. No. We're treating it like it's serious music from the very beginning.
Okay. Is there? I know that there's just some sort of push to have white students who are kind of in the stuck baseline position of their degree to kind of like be more inclusive. But sometimes, like, I know somebody who it just thinks that it's some liberal agenda. And so
you know why inclusivity is difficult for people? Because it's new. You don't have to be inclusive when everywhere you turn around, it's always people that look like you. You don't have to think about inclusivity. Only time you have to think about inclusivity is when it's a bunch of people around you that don't look like you. I love that we talk about a liberal agenda, that you said that, because the one thing I think about is it's not really an agenda. I think that every educator has to look at the people in front of them. And if all the people in front of them look like them, then you do what you do.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if any of those people in front of you don't look like you, you owe it to them to have some type of skin in the game and inspire them musically, just like you inspire the people that look like you. That's the argument. It's not a liberal agenda because you're here to teach music. You are here to teach music and teach music identity.
Yeah.
So why would you shorten and not broaden a student's experience of their identity if their identity is different from yours?
Big thank you to Dr. Richard Hodges, Dr. James Ray, Zach Shelton, Chase Ferris, Katie Cook, Christian Baldillo, and Micah. Each person is a music educator or future music educator. And thank you for listening.